Archie, good morning. Nicholas, thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, it's always an enormous pleasure and honor to be part of DSDS. And it's precisely because of our overfilled diplomatic agenda this year that I'm here in New York rather than with you in Delhi, where I would prefer to be. But we have very extensive discussions this very week at the United Nations on the 2015 agenda. So I'm called to be in New York right now. You know, there will be no more important year, no more make or break year for sustainable development than this year, than 2015. This is our best chance, and I think for our generation, perhaps the only chance we have to change the course of global diplomacy and global economic direction towards sustainable development. The diplomatic agenda is packed. On the one side, that means it's a bit treacherous. On the other side, it means we have an opportunity to make some very big and important agreements. The fact is, as you know, two crucial processes came together for this year. The Millennium Development Goals were set already back in the year 2000 to finish this year in the year 2015. So there was already a decision made, set many years ago, that this would be a transition year to new objectives. In 2012, on the 20th anniversary of the Earth Summit, the member states of the United Nations said that the post-2015 development agenda should be based on sustainable development. That is, on a philosophy of combining economic, social, and environmental sustainability. Now, it happened that in addition to that process, the climate negotiations are also culminating this year in Paris. That's because of a different timeline, which also ends now. When Copenhagen failed to reach a climate agreement back in 2009, the government set a new timeline for one more try, one more chance to reach an agreement under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And in 2010 in Cancun, they looked forward to December 2015 at COP21 to be that moment when finally we reach an agreement to implement the Framework Convention 23 years after it was signed. So we have two crucial processes within the space of just 2 months. In September, the UN member states will adopt new sustainable development goals. And in December, the same governments will meet in Paris to finalize an agreement on climate change. Now, if that were not enough, in contemplating these two big summits, the developing countries said, but wait a minute, if we're going to achieve sustainable development, if we're going to achieve a meaningful climate agreement, we need a financial arrangement that underpins sustainable development and that underpins climate change mitigation and adaptation. So the developing countries asked for a third process, and that is a summit on financing for sustainable development, which was set for this July 12 to 15, in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. So if you add it up, ladies and gentlemen, we have 3 high-level summits to take place in just 6 months. Financing for sustainable development in July, adopting sustainable development goals in September, and finalizing a climate agreement in December. It's an extremely crowded agenda. Not one of these three negotiations is close to completion. The time is very short. There are 193 member states that are part of all three of these negotiations. And so we have a very filled diplomatic agenda this year. If we get it right, we can do nothing less than changing course so that we can have the safety and assurance to know that global economic growth and development will be aligned with the physical planetary needs, not only of climate, but biodiversity, management of ecosystems, and the fairness of the economic systems as part of sustainable development. Just to conclude, Nicholas, to summarize where we stand right now, there are some basic parameters that are shared but not yet firmly in place. For the Sustainable Development Goals, there are 17 highlight goals or headline goals that have already been designated. But now the work is to get those goals into a smaller number, more meaningful, and to combine them with targets and indicators and a process of accountability to make these new SDGs or Sustainable Development Goals meaningful. For the financing summit in July, there is a basic understanding that this summit will combine several different objectives. The first is to assure the future of the official development assistance, the aid process. Second, to define climate financing, the so-called $100 billion per year promise that the rich countries have made to help the poor countries in climate mitigation and adaptation. The third part of this process is to mobilize private capital to scale up tremendously the levels of investment in sustainable infrastructure in both the rich and the poor countries. And the fourth pillar of the July meeting is to try to reform the regulatory framework of international finance to cut down sharply on the corruption, the illicit flows, and the financing of unsustainable investments. And then finally, to turn to December, I think all of us hope that at the core of the December agreement is the 2 degrees Celsius upper limit on warming that governments have agreed is the absolute limit on the permissible extent of human-induced climate change based on the IPCC evidence that Patchy and his colleagues have developed so persuasively and effectively over the years. So the governments have said, we accept the 2-degree limit on warming, but they have not yet implemented a framework to accomplish that. The true test of the December agreement is whether it truly will enable the world to stay below the 2 degrees C upper limit. This is a huge agenda. In other words, time is short, and we do not have a backup plan. We must succeed in 2015. Back to you, Nicholas.